Yes, he did. Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Well, thanks for joining us for this edition of Donnybrook. We have a great show, lots of topics on this last edition for the month of May. And as a special treat on the second half of the program, we're going to talk to Dan Isom, who's the interim public safety director for the city of St. Louis. And we'll be talking about crime and other issues when Chief Isom joins us. But first, let's meet the panelists joining us for this Donnybrook, starting with the news director for the Big 550 KTRS and the co-host of the Jennifer and Wendy Show, Wendy Wiese, along with one of our founders, Mr. Bill McClellan from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, another founder from rawstory.com, the Riverfront Times, and the Big 550, Ray Hartmann, and from the St. Louis American, Alvin Reid. We're going to start with you, Wendy, as there was video, the likes of which we haven't seen before. Washington Avenue, Saturday night, a lot of people leaving a party, and they ended up dancing on a squad car, St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department squad car with an officer inside it. For folks who like twerking, this was your night, and it was all captured on video. Kind of became it went viral, I guess you could say. It does seem kind of unusual when you do have people dancing on squad cars. We'll probably pose some of these questions to Dan Isom when he joins us later in the hour. But overall, your thoughts on where we are in the city when people are dancing on top of police cars?
Well, dancing is sort of an interesting term because you think of, I don't know, you think of fun, you don't think of property damage. And the squad car was clearly damaged. Sheriff Vernon Betts said that this kind of thing was bound to happen when you have sheriff's deputies pulled off the streets because some agreement with former Mayor Lyda Crewson had expired. Mayor Tashara Jones, in light of what has happened, is now putting out special details from 7 to 3, crime details, and then I think from 8 to 4, there's going to be a special detail. But we obviously need more police presence. It's sad that the sheriff said, this kind of thing was unavoidable. I don't think that damaging a squad car is something that should be unavoidable. I mean, I think that just because people are leaving clubs on Washington Avenue doesn't mean that they should incite this kind of chaos.
I mean, I agree, Wendy. People leave clubs in Soho, Manhattan, Sunset Strip, okay? And all this doesn't go on. But all this has been going on Washington Avenue for a very long time. And as I had said, entertainment district police make it like Beale Street. You can't walk 10 yards without seeing not one police officer, but 2 or 3. And, the whole idea that this is somehow the present administration's fault is ridiculous. And it's just, take control of St. Louis in a legal manner on Washington Avenue. To me, that is not that big an assignment. And I just don't understand why now it seems like people have awoke and, so like, oh, we're going to have, special details and this and that. But this has been going on Washington Avenue since it became an entertainment district. So
I don't know about the dancing on the police cars, Alvin, but I think
wait, Charlie, not to interrupt you.
Well, the police car was crushed.
People are dancing on police cars. How many people have been shot on Washington Avenue? How many have been killed? How many people? The people driving up and down the street 85 miles an hour. Lawlessness has been a part of Washington Avenue for 2 decades. So don't bring me this all came to a head because some idiots are dancing on top of a police car.
Actually, the lawlessness and the violence is relatively recent in downtown St. Louis, and this is from someone who has worked down there since 1988. First 2 decades I worked down there, there was no crime whatsoever. I mean, literally. But recently, you're right. It's become kind of crazy. Not only 2 shootings on Saturday, but there are also a lot of people drag racing, and residents, including Les Sturman, who lives down there, former head of the East West Gateway Council of Governments. He's saying, something's got to happen. They got to take a look at the liquor licenses. They have to have more police officers. And I'm not blaming the mayor for the twerking on a dance car, but I will say her plans to cut back on the police force are not going to help the matter at all.
Well, but that's a whole other issue, Charlie. I mean, what's happening downtown? Alvin is right. This thing has been going on for a while, and the police just kind of surrendering downtown to whoever wants it. And I don't think that you can blame Tashara Jones at all for the lawlessness that's been going on before she took over.
Of course not, but we're really fortunate.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ray.
I was just going to say, I think it's interesting that because of the nature of this story, and there's no doubt that the people should have been, punished for doing it and stuff, but to kind of keep this in perspective, we got a city with not only all these homicides, but you look at what's happening. I mean, these kids being killed, all the things that are so much more intense. This is bad. There's no question about it. And you're right, Charlie. I can remember for as long as you could, that downtown was the safe. But I will say this, even when downtown was the safest part of St. Louis, statistically, nobody believed it. I remember fighting that fight in the early years of the RFT. Nobody believed it. But keep in mind, entertainment districts in general have this kind of nonsense, maybe not involve a police car everywhere, but this isn't like the only place that people coming out partying from at the end of a nightclub, at the end of the night in a nightclub district, ridiculous.
Oh, it's different. I just came from Memphis, Tennessee, and I thought of Alvin when I was there, because Alvin talked about how there's all this security there, and there was. And
no, I agree with that. I'm not arguing.
People were partying, but it wasn't the lawlessness, the speeding, squealing around in your cars that we have let downtown St. Louis become.
I don't
Memphis
disagree with
is
that.
successful and has been successful for a very long time, so they can afford that kind of security protection. We're not going to get there overnight.
Probably true.
All I'm saying is, if you go around,
let's move on. Thanks, everybody. Our next topic goes to Bill for the first comment. We're going to talk about really the fourth major development in about as many weeks that has been told, hey, you've got to wait for your tax breaks. We talked earlier this year about the renovation of the Jesuit living quarters at Grandin Lindell, and the Tashara Jones administration has said, hold on, you're not going to get your tax breaks immediately. We're going to negotiate. The same is true for a project in the 3600 block of Locust, and one called, I believe it's the Foundry, headed up by Stephen Smith. But now, this week, the crown jewel of St. Louis development, Cortex, which is attracting high-tech companies from all over the world. Microsoft is there, BJC, WashU, and Boeing, and they've got fancy restaurants. Well, they've already received, Bill, about $130 million in tax breaks. They want more. The Jones administration has said, rightly, I believe, hey, wait a second. Do you really need it if your vacancy rate is 1% and you're already doing so well? But it's making some people nervous that she might be denying a tax break to Cortex. Are you nervous?
Well, I want to give the new mayor plenty of opportunity to succeed, and I'm rooting for her. But yeah, it does. I think it's a concerning thing when people have made deals with the city, and all of a sudden the new mayor and the new alderman are saying, wait a minute, those deals are off. You're going to have to renegotiate. If I were an out-of-town investor and my people in St. Louis had made a deal and signed contracts, and all of a sudden I'm told that, nope, those deals aren't good anymore, we're going to have to renegotiate. I go, what's the sense of making a deal?
Well, Bill, I don't think they're violating any existing contracts. If I understand this correctly, it's about more contract. They want more tax credits on top.
I thought these were deals that had already been made,
Well, if
that
they're
the new
already-
administration is
if-
saying, No,
No.
we're going to renegotiate this.
Well, first of all, if the deals are made and there's contracts, the city's not going to win that argument. I mean, they'll lose immediately in court. I'm guessing.
They are a work in progress, as they say. Not.
Well, yeah,
Or
these
they're
are
going
deals
to-
that I think that the powers that be in this town have been working on an assumption for decades, because they're right in this case about the assumption, which is that they can have what they want when they want it. And so the optics of a mayor that's saying, I'm going to pump the brakes here on some things about future tax increases following up on the ones you've got. I think just the fact that we've got an administration willing to look somebody across the table in the eye and say, you don't just automatically get this.
Okay, I thought deals had already been made, Ray.
I don't know, but if
Here's
they
what I
are,
believe
they're going to
happened. They've been
What?
They've been largely negotiated, and they haven't been signed, sealed, and delivered just yet.
Well, then they're not done.
Alderwoman Peel and Mayor Tashara Jones are both talking about renegotiating. Sounds like they're going to try to incentivize some development in North St. Louis and elsewhere, previously economic, deteriorating areas in our city. That's all they're going to try to do. Yes, she is. I think that she is a masterful politician. I think she's just doing what she's trying to do in terms of keeping her promises, her campaign promises.
I think ultimately all these projects will go forward. It might be with a little less money, where the administration can say like, "Hey, we saved St. Louis $1 million," something like that. I think it'll all be worked out, and I'm sure the mayor of Denver, if he could have stepped in and tried to renegotiate the deal that sent Arenado to the St. Louis Cardinals, he or she would have done so, and the people of Denver would have applauded that. I mean, and I'm not, I'm joking, but at the same time, hey, if you can keep another $1 million maybe in the city coffer on, Cortex, and 500,000 from this, 250,000 from that, it adds up. So, I mean, this is what she's supposed to be doing as the mayor. We have had enough ribbon cutting, smiling mayors the last two. I can throw Hartmann in there also, the last three. And okay, so I thought this is what a mayor of a major metropolitan city was supposed to do.
And one other thing, Charlie, Wendy hit it. Wendy said, the words that don't get said enough here that do get said in campaigns, which is North St. Louis. I mean, the idea to Tashara Jones, it's not just a campaign promise. They've been talking for decades about the need to stop neglecting North St. Louis, and this is at least a suggestion. Now, maybe that's actually going to happen.
Okay. So we go back to Alvin Reid, and now let's talk about neglected Chesterfield, where the county council has voted to approve tons of subsidies, property tax abatements, and sales tax exemptions for a firm called Gateway Studios, music and film production. Alvin, do you think that a company moving to Chesterfield needs taxpayer assistance? And do you support this project?
Okay. Now, in full transparency, this will come back to the place I live. Okay. But here's what I'm saying. This is the kind of investment. Okay. And I'm not a big tax credit statewide, and we're going to be the Hollywood of the Midwest. That's kind of pipe dreamish. Okay. But for Chesterfield to say like, hey, if we could subsidize this and it comes here, the benefit from that might be really, really way more in tax money in the long run than what we would be getting without it. If Kirkwood had done it, I probably would support it. And then when Samuel L. Jackson and I are, grilling pork steaks in the backyard, that's good for all of us. So I can't eschew Chesterfield for doing this. Granted, they ain't hurting for money, but I like this kind of play because it's a big win instead of a marginal win, and I really don't think it'll cost them all that much.
Well, I don't think Samuel L. Jackson is coming to town. This is music and content production. I'm not sure the stars are going to be here, but I'll say it's crazy that Chesterfield is giving tax incentives for companies to do business there. I thought we were just talking about the need for North St. Louis. And where are the woke members of the county council who should be saying, hey, why aren't you taking and diverting a certain percentage of your tax breaks to people in North County? And that's what Alderman Peel on the 17th Ward is suggesting, as well as the mayor of St. Louis. We'll give you the tax breaks, just divert some of it to people who need it, but they're not doing that in Chesterfield.
Charlie, that's all in the city of St. Louis. Now, is there a poor part of Chesterfield?
There's North County. And the county is given the tax breaks, and the county has some very poor communities, including the trash in Wellston and Kinloch.
All right, I'm sorry. I was pointing my finger at Chesterfield, or not pointing my finger at Chesterfield, but you're right, Charlie. That's correct.
Well, and I think, Charlie, I mean, I don't think communities, unfortunately, in a perfect world, there would be no such thing as a tax break for any company, anytime in a place like Chesterfield. It's just not what they were designed to be when they.
When was the last time any of you traveled to? I'm sorry, Ray, to interrupt. Just briefly, when was the last time any of you have traveled to Chesterfield Valley? It's been pretty hard hit by the pandemic.
I get it, but
I mean, honestly,
my point is, but what I want to finish is that you can't unilaterally disarm. And Charlie's got it. I didn't know. You're right, Charlie, about the county maybe looking at this in a different way. You can't blame Chesterfield for not unilaterally disarming in a war that's just because the Chesterfields throughout not only Missouri but other states, they're have
selling the school children down the river.
I get it, but you can't just unilaterally disarm.
Ray, you can't keep complaining on this program that the schools are underfunded while you approve every tax break for every Tom, Dick, and Harry who wants one.
Didn't you hear me? I don't approve of the concept, but you can't say every project can't be considered as long as wealthy communities all over this region, and more important, others are. This is the problem we've got.
Well, what do you think, Ray, about raising the gas tax? The General Assembly already approved that, but there's a group that wants to put it on the ballot. And recently you talked about the sanctity of the voters when it came to expanding Medicaid in the state. And do you think that if the voters decide to pull back that gas tax, and they just might do that on the ballot, that we would have to respect their opinions?
No, because this isn't yes, but the fact is, this isn't the voters deciding anything. This is the Americans for Prosperity, which was one of the original Koch brothers funded. I mean, this is the big boys that probably did more to bring about the Tea Party movement than any other organization in the country. This isn't some little group of citizens. These are the folks who fought so hard against Medicaid expansion, who I think would probably vote for, who would just dismantle Medicaid altogether. These are the libertarian. They're sort of the national version of what Rex Sinquefield does here. And this is a big, big group with big money. And it's terrible. The legislators, and I'm talking about the Republicans now, finally got the guts together to pass a reasonable tax increase without a taxpayer mandate. It's well within the Hancock limits. There's nothing. And again, in the paper, Charlie, one thing, the guy was saying, well, yeah, we know infrastructure and roads they don't have an answer. Americans for Prosperity have no answer for how we're going to pay for road projects.
But if I could jump in, all I'm going to say is that, if the people of the state of Missouri voted down a gasoline tax, I find it ironic that the legislature, now would they then step in and say, forget what the people say, we're doing it anyway, like with Medicaid.
Exactly right.
So I say let the people vote and let's show the hypocrisy.
What do you say, Bill?
Yeah, I'm with Alvin. The legislature ignores the will of the people all the time. I mean, they did it on puppy mills. They did it on concealed carry had been a referendum and Medicaid. So if the people want to, if somebody wants the people to vote on this, fine. But the legislature's not going to necessarily go along with the will of the people.
Well, I will say I'm not against the gasoline tax going up 12.5 cents over 5 years.
Well,
It's already the lowest in the nation. However, there are three other aspects to consider. Number one, the state does have a $1 billion surplus. So there's that. The tax is regressive. It affects the poor people, which we all care about so much the most. And we don't know if the federal government is going to be sending us billions through the infrastructure bill. I say, hey, why not wait and see? If they send us billions, we may not need that 12.5%.
I just think the fact that this conservative legislature finally, it's kind of like groundbreaking after all these decades, that the idea that in a representative democracy, the legislature, which is in charge of appropriating money, could actually impose a small tax increase is so earth moving that I don't think they should be punished. And again, this is not some uprising of the people.
Okay.
It's a
and Charlie, the whole
party think tank is doing this.
Charlie, the whole idea of waiting on the infrastructure and for some kind of deal to be struck between President Biden and Capitol Hill, it's like waiting to put the house fire out. I'm not.
But wait, there'll be an agreement, and like I said, let's vote. Let's be transparent, because then the legislature is going to say, like, we don't want Biden's Medicaid money, but we'll take every dollar of Biden's, infrastructure money. Yeah, let's vote. Come on, let's put it out there.
The legislators should never pass a tax increase for any reason ever.
I didn't say that. What I'm saying is that, hey, put it on there. Then it's up to you, legislature, to now overrule the people like you have so many times. And it's on you, legislature, to explain why we don't want the Medicaid money, but we sure want the infrastructure money.
We'll take the infrastructure.
Yeah,
I'll give you that point, Alvin. I'll give you that point.
Okay, Bill McClellan, I want to ask you about a revision this week by Richard Callahan. He's the special prosecutor hired by the Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner to look into possible charges against Mark and Patricia McCloskey, the gun-wielding Central West End couple. We know all about them, don't we? Well, he has dropped the gun tampering charge and adding a second-degree harassment charge. It's also possible that the Patricia McCloskey could get convicted on an exhibiting charge. But it's a lot of attention for two individuals who really didn't hurt anybody at the end of the day. And you have to admit, in a city with the clearance rate, with 262 murders and a clearance rate of 30%, don't you wonder where our priorities are here?
Well, we're talking about the will of the people, and I support that. And the will of the people in the city of St. Louis was to reelect Kim Gardner. And, that what we get for that is an occasional show trial. We got the Eric Greitens show trial. I mean, it didn't make it all the way, but and this, when you have, like you say, bodies littering the city, and we're going to have a big trial against the McCloskeys. It's a show trial. It's entertainment. I support it. It should be fun. I think Callahan is a much more experienced prosecutor, clearly, than Kim Gardner or anybody Ms. Gardner has on her staff. So if Callahan thinks this is a better charge, dollars to donuts, it is. But is this a serious thing? No.
It is a serious thing. And by the way, it's a total, even though Kim Gardner at least put out a statement that she didn't say it exactly, but it kind of implied she wasn't happy. That she
Ray, she said it. She said we studied this and we came up with the
charged it right,
charges.
Bill.
So she said that.
She said she charged it right, but the fact is this is a huge validation for her and a huge rejection of the McCloskey's central argument, which is just some witch hunt by a George Soros prosecutor. This is Richard Callahan. Could not be more different than Kim Gardner. He could have come in and said nothing to see here, folks. He actually said, working off of what she did, that there is something to see here. And most definitely, he's a very serious prosecutor.
It's a
And I think
misdemeanor
Well,
charge.
I don't think this is
Ray.
a big vindication of
I
what we're going to do.
definitely think
It's a
that,
show trial, and we're going to.
no, it isn't.
Do you think this
look
makes
at it as
Tisby
entertainment.
disappear, Ray? This makes the whole
It has nothing
Tisby.
to do with Tisby.
No.
This is about.
He's going to court in 2022.
Tisby's a different case.
No,
okay?
you make it sound like she's exonerated from every accusation.
I didn't say anything about this
Okay.
case. This case got nothing to do with Tisby. This is and you say nobody got hurt. This is about somebody menacing innocent bystanders.
Oh,
and
like that
people
doesn't
walking
happen
by the
every
street,
minute of the
and
day in
I don't
St.
think
Louis.
it's okay.
I mean, look, I can't change my tune. When it's all first started, and they were even before charges were delivered, I said, like, just don't even charge these yahoos with anything. This is just like some pitiful soap opera that only can be staged in St. Louis, Missouri.
And
Oh my
by the
God!
way, I will say this.
Go away.
In his campaign.
I will say McCoskey personally benefits from it in his.
Of course
yeah.
he does.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that it's not a valid charge, because it is. And
Well,
we can't have people thinking they can point shaking pistol. We first of all can't even have people dress that poorly. But we cannot have people shaking their weapons.
Ray, we already have
do
people
that.
doing more than shaking their weapons. We have people using their weapons.
I understand.
Every
Did
night.
I say
Every
it was
night.
the worst crime in St. Louis? Obviously, it's not. But
Well,
it's
don't
still
forget,
a crime.
Ray, 30 kids killed in 2019, 2020, not one
Of course that's the
prosecution.
worst.
And yet we go after the McCloskeys.
No, you can do both. Actually, you can still
I'd like
prosecute
that.
I
murders.
wish we did
She
both.
looked like she had never even held a gun
Right,
before.
but the point is,
I mean,
Exactly. I mean,
this isn't a question
listen, all that other stuff is very, very serious, and it's terrifying and it's horrible. The McCloskeys are silly, and St. Louis has no time for silliness. Okay, this is just silly.
this is
Right.
not a choice between prosecuting them and prosecuting murders. Okay, and particularly
Well, we're
now,
prosecuting them, Ray, and we're not prosecuting a lot of murders.
That's not true. First
It
of all.
is true.
It is.
I mean, this is a,
30% clearance rate, Ray.
Well, a lot of that has.
But Ray,
got to
what
do
about
with-
what about the child who was shot and the guy said it was self-defense, and in federal court they had to increase the time he was going to serve. You know the case I'm talking about, right? Where the guy shot the child in the backyard. He was shooting at somebody else, and then he tried to rob his employer, and the feds got him for the robbery and asked for an enhanced sentence because he had actually killed a child. I mean, there's craziness going on.
Hey, let's take a
this
break
is
here and
not-
come back in a
this
moment.
story needs to be judged on its own merits. That's all, not compared to everything else.
Thanks, everybody, for your opinions. In a moment, we're going to ask for your questions when we talk to Dan Isom, the interim public safety director for the city of St. Louis. Great timing. That's next on Next Up.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on Next Up. And this is where we talk to community leaders. And we're so glad that Chief Dan Isom, although no longer police chief, I still call him chief, now the interim public safety director for the city of St. Louis, has kindly agreed to take our questions on 9PBS. Chief Isom, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, in the first half of the program, we were talking about Washington Avenue on Saturday night and the dancing on Squad Car. And basically, it looks like we could use a few more police officers in downtown St. Louis. The sheriff, Vernon Betts, has said that he's going to have 10 groups of 2 officers patrolling Washington Avenue. But the mayor has indicated that she's not going to hire as many police officers as her predecessor had hoped to. And she is taking about $4 million from the overtime budget to other worthy causes. Are you concerned, though, that we don't have enough police officers on the streets of downtown St. Louis?
Well, I think we have to, look at what's happened in the past 4 years, we've maintained the same level of officers for the last 4 years. So what we have now is what we've had for the last 4 years. I think in particular for downtown, certainly the behavior of the young people is not what we expect when you go downtown and have a good time. But understanding the incident, there was a party where a performer was there. The party ended, and like what happens with so many other performers, they rent out a space to have the after party. And so the after party went into this space with probably about 500 young people in there. And then when the party was shut down, they all poured out onto the street. Unfortunately, they didn't just leave, of course. When the police arrived, one officer, he tried to clear the area. And, unfortunately, there was that bad behavior. So I think if you take that incident in context, um, whether you think we should have more or less police, I don't think that would have changed that particular incident, right? A large party lets out, an officer happens to be there, he tries to move people out the street, and you get some rambunctious kids who do something that is completely inappropriate. I thought the officer showed a lot of restraint in handling the situation, especially in light of circumstances today. But back to your previous question, I think we have a lot of officers. My job is to try to get them to work in the most efficient way. And I think that's what I'm trying to do in the first, 35 days that I've been here.
Ray?
Mr. Acting Commissioner, is that it? I guess you were on St. Louis on public radio last week. I assume St. Louis on the, I guess, Sarah show, suggesting that the governor should veto the so-called Second Amendment Preservation Act, which would I don't know if he's even signed it yet, but that would really keep officers from enforcing gun laws. I mean, and federal gun laws. What do you think the state of play is with regard to guns and St. Louis and our ability to have control of guns in a way that might not be appropriate or acceptable in other parts of Missouri?
Well, I think everybody's well aware that our laws have become increasingly lax in terms of guns in the state of Missouri. And there's certainly a debate between rural and urban areas on this issue. The rural areas see certainly a benefit of having firearms for a number of different reasons. But in the urban areas, we feel that we need to have some measure of accountability for either purchasing weapons, carrying weapons, even training of individuals with weapons. And so we're to a point now where it's very difficult to manage whether a person should have a gun legally or illegally because our laws in Missouri are pretty lax. Going even further than that, this legislation is suggesting that local officers can't even work with federal officers with federal gun crimes, federal gun charges, and going to the point where they could even be penalized for doing so. And so if you're pro-police, which I am, then let's not take tools away from officers and put them in a situation where they don't know whether they can enforce something or not. And we really need that cooperation with federal law enforcement, along with our circuit attorney, to make sure that violent crime goes down in the city of St. Louis.
Alvin?
Yeah, more so than the current mayor and the last mayor and probably all 28 of the aldermen and the board of estimate portion. Jeff Warda better than any of those people. Do you think you can forge some type of working relationship with him? Have you talked to him since you were appointed to this job?
No, I haven't talked to him so far. I've been so focused on really digging into the three primary issues that I'm working on now, and that's certainly trying to address violent crime in the city of St. Louis, which, in my opinion, is the number one priority. The second is the transition from a medium security prison into the jail and making sure that that goes off smoothly as possible. And then, trying to deal with the 911 system that we have. And so I haven't had even time to think about Jeff Rorta, the union, or anything else. I'm so laser focused on those three things that he hadn't even crossed my mind.
Wendy?
You have always had, Chief, an interest in the structure, political and otherwise, when it comes to police departments. What has been happening to the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department in terms, if you had your priorities, like a wish list of priorities, how would you change the structure, the actual structure of the department, and why? To what end, hopefully?
Well, I mean, I've always been an advocate of making the department more nimble in terms of the leadership structure, not having so many different layers within the police department. I think it affects communication. And, since I've been there, it may seem simple, but that is the major thing that I've been trying to do is get all the connected parts communicating together on a regular basis, moving in the same direction. Structure has a big deal to do with that. If you have the right structure, then it facilitates better communication and cooperation. So, one of the things that I'm doing, which will take time, is really looking at each unit, their productivity, how they're working, whether or not the the data that comes out of that analysis is that they're working in the direction that at least I feel that it ought to be going in. And so, and this is to the first point that Charlie raised, is that I think we could get more efficiencies out of our police department. Are we doing the things that really citizens want us to do with our police officers, right? And so I'm digging into the calls for service, the arrest, the traffic tickets, all the things that officers and do to see if we could recoup some of that time to do what I think is most important, which is be visible in the community. I hear from people, traffic enforcement is a key, and then, of course, violent crime. Now, there are other things that we have to do. I certainly don't minimize, property crime and stuff like that. But I think violent crime, traffic, and visibility are the things that I hear from citizens all the time. So yeah, I'm really digging into that, and it's going to take some time.
Bill?
Chief, every time we get a new chief, there's a debate about whether we should have a national search or whether we should promote from within. And we have always promoted from within. So I have a two-part question for you. The one is probably a yes or no. Would you recommend retaining Chief Hayden? And the second is, if we were going to get a new chief for whatever reason, do you think there should be a national search or promote from within?
Right. Well, Chief Hayden is still here, so I don't think he's going anywhere at this moment. So we're working well together. Chief Hayden, of course, worked for me previously when I was chief. So we're working lockstep to try to get this violent crime under control and all the other issues that we have within the police department. So we're working well, and that's going to continue until there's a time where he decides that he wants to step away. So the second question is that although there are some quality people within the police department, certainly some of them probably could be police chief. But I think it's important that we have a national search, that we look far and wide for the best candidate. And even though I've been here for a long time and some people believe that I can get the job done, there may be someone out there, some young, energetic, or older, energetic person who could bring some fresh new ideas to St. Louis. And, I don't think that's a bad thing, especially since we have never done it before. What the heck, it might, work, and we might get some good ideas that will really transform St. Louis. So I think we would be just doing a disservice if we didn't do a national search for a police chief. And that's not a knock on anybody who's currently within the St. Louis Police Department.
Mr. Isom, the mayor would like to close the medium security workhouse by the 1st of July. That's one of her goals. She ran on that. Now she's in charge and she plans to proceed. And yet, there are some members of the Board of Aldermen, like Joe Vaccaro and Brandon Bosley, who say that the medium security workhouse is not as bad as she has indicated. Sheriff Vernon Betts has said the same thing. So have corrections officials. Would you allow members of the media to take a tour of the medium security workhouse?
Well, the rules and regulations really only allow limited access into the correctional facility. And right now, there are a number of different things that we have to do, not the least of which getting, releases from every detainee in there, not allowing media to be in certain locations. That all is a pretty logistical nightmare at this point in time, especially when we have, two different facilities. We've got repairs going on. We're trying to figure out a way that we can move all of our detainees from MSI into the Justice Center. So logistically, right now is just a terrible time for us to start having tours. Now, we do have let politicians in because they are the voice and the eyes and ears of the people. And so I think it's important to let political officials in to see the conditions of the jail so they can report out to the community. But at this point in time, with all the things that we're dealing with, trying to transition, and even the limited views that media would be allowed to be in there, it's just not really feasible for us at this time.
If I could just jump in briefly, your predecessor, Judge Jimmy Edwards, did allow some members of the media to look, myself included. Have the rules regarding media access changed?
No, I mean, we could authorize it. That's certainly true. But, as I said, there are a lot of things that we're trying to do right now. And, we really don't have the time and want to put the energy into giving tours of the jail.
You referred to three big areas that are so big that it's hard to know how quickly you can have an answer to this, but either with regard to violent crime, the jail situation, which we just talked about, and particularly the 911, do you have any progress to report at this point? Any news to make tonight, or otherwise, if not, certainly focus on the 911 system. That seems so egregious that anyone should call 911 and get a busy signal or get put on hold. What can you tell us about fixing that in particular?
Yeah, unfortunately, the 911 system is really more about personnel and numbers of people than anything else. And I came from the police side, and when I was with the police, we were separate from the city. But what I found with the city is the hiring process for the city of St. Louis is, oh, wow, it's one of the most complex things I've ever seen in my life. And so trying to get people hired is really the biggest issue. I've dug into it and tried to look at the data on, where we're having problems, and it's really about numbers. And so I'm trying to work on a temporary solution where fire dispatchers work with police dispatchers to take calls. So that would increase our numbers. But I'm even having problems getting that done because technically fire and police can't work together, which I don't understand. But I'm working through those issues. Long term, trying to get the police and fire on the same system. But the other thing is about communication. And I know a lot of people call and say they can't get the police department. And certainly that's true because our numbers are low. But there are circumstances when that happens where, and that's not all the time, but it's when 16 people call at one time for the same incident, we might pick up the call within a minute. And we might even arrive on the call within 3 minutes. But that 16th person was on hold, and they say, well, the police department didn't get there. And so there was just a story on Channel 2 about this. So part of it is an education that we have to do, that I'd like to do. Certainly we need to fix it because there are people who wait for a long time, but there's also a large number of people who call 911 for things that are not 911 related. And there is also this second, third tier that there are a lot of calls that are gone, people go to and we get to on time that that actually somebody who was the 16th caller had to wait for a long period of time. So it's those three things. There are legitimately people who hang on for a long time. That is a problem. And then we have this education component, and then some people who actually hang on because we just have too many people call at one time. So that's the 911 system. I think we're actually making a little progress on the violence. I want to knock on wood because the numbers seem to be trending in a good direction, at least this month since we started our summer violence detail. We've started to get traffic out there a little bit more, but they've been working on sort of this violence project with us. But I've got some ideas on how we can get more traffic enforcement in the neighborhoods and on the highways. So that will take some time.
Chief, right now we've got some of our, corporate leaders have been signaling out crime and threatening to move their individual, business, Michael Nightoff. Now you mentioned the problem with hiring, people, and I'm going to follow this up. But does that include police officers as well?
Well, curiously enough, the police department has been able to hire enough officers each year to deal with attrition. And so the attrition numbers, I would imagine are probably around 80, maybe 90 officers a year. So that's not really small potatoes, 90 officers a year. So you're actually getting applicants. And you would have to imagine out of that 90, there were a whole bunch of other ones that were turned away for various reasons, some legitimate and some just, these were the best 90 that we came up with. So I don't know if this issue of people not applying for the police department is that significant as we think it is, especially if you can get 90 people a year.
Okay. So my next question was, if corporate St. Louis stepped up and said, and I don't know how much it counting benefits and salary, how much it costs for a police officer to be a police officer for, let's say, for 10 years. But if the community came together and said, Chief Hayden, Dan Isom, here's $30 million, but it has to go to hiring police officers and, their benefits. That's the only thing you can spend it on. Could you put that to use? And would that be helpful in reducing the violent crime rate, especially in North St. Louis?
Well, more money, more resources usually does help a situation. More so than that, what I'm working towards is the corporate community taking more ownership and responsibility in public safety. If you look at the Central Corridor all the way through, there are a lot of corporate security departments from Kings Highway all the way down to the landing. And so, what I hope to do is work with them where they would help us to manage some of these areas, provide better visibility, patrol in areas that could help us to manage downtown and the Central Corridor, put more security resources in those to help us with those areas. And thereby, we would still be in those areas, but we could have more attention in the neighborhood. So I'm asking them to be more a part of the security footprint in areas that they have a lot of resources.
You are eminently qualified. You are very aware of all of the challenges that we face in terms of St. Louis and violent crime, Chief Isom. But we've had the post-pandemic sort of the realization that we have locks that don't work at the Justice Center. We have the aforementioned problems with the 911 system. What was it that made you say yes when Mayor Jones took your call in this moment? What were the personal reasons that motivated you to say yes in 2021?
Well, I mean, I think you certainly sit back on the sidelines and you look at what's happening, and you feel that you have something to offer, that you have sort of background, um, experience, the relationships to hopefully make a difference. And then also, I mean, we've got our first African American female mayor, who is put in the position to try to turn the city around. I think we're all inspired by that, um, by this being the first, right? And that it could be something really good for the city of St. Louis. And so when the previous public safety director stepped down, certainly crime, public safety is at the top of the issue. I mean, for this region. And, I felt I could come in and provide some stability, some direction on that front for this new mayor, to get her administration, one part of her administration, going in the direction she needed to go in. So it really was a combination of me feeling a sense that I could give back to the community, and a sense of pride with the new first African American female mayor, and wanted to be a part of that.
Could I ask a quick follow-up? If you disagree with Mayor Jones, Chief, do you feel comfortable enough, privately obviously, to have those discussions with her?
Well, the mayor told me just recently, if you have a problem, Dan, just push back. So we want your honest feedback on how you feel. And so, I'm moving in the direction I think is best for um, dealing with crime in the city of St. Louis. We're trying to do the best we can with the jail. And so, yeah, I feel very comfortable that I can be open and honest with this mayor about how I feel and the direction I think we ought to go.
Chief, the mayor talks about sending the appropriate professional to situations, and not always the police officer. And I interviewed the outgoing chief of Maplewood, Steve Cruz, a few weeks ago, and he was saying that the problem he said, we work with BJC social workers all the time, but the problem is you don't know who the appropriate person is when you get a call. And that the idea of sending social workers out on a lot of these calls is putting them in a terrible danger. I mean, how do you explain that? I mean, how would you know when, well, this call won't require a police officer, we'll send a social worker?
Well, I don't think it's, at least in the police department with the current system, it's not working like that. There are crews where a social worker works with a police officer, so they will be the second person in the car. Or an officer gets to a call and they assess it and they find out that this is something that the social worker could provide more support for. I mean, we're in the process of trying to, and this is before I even came, to evaluate which calls can a social worker actually go to by his or herself.
Right.
But you're right. There are a lot there that need that initial assessment by a police officer. But either way, even if you get to a point where you're able to do that, that's a lot of calls that could be diverted from a police response, which ultimately is better for police. Because when police are intervening in personal circumstances that don't really involve the police, oftentimes the police solution, and this is not any knock on the police, is to use legal means to resolve the solution. like arrest. And so if we can minimize that impact on citizens through another means, it's all good for everybody, right? And so I do agree with you. This is a work in progress that right now we're not very comfortable with just sending social workers out. It's more police and social workers, but we're working to that point where we can identify which calls would be appropriate, like homeless. You know, we get a lot of calls for homelessness.
Right.
We really need to go to those.
Chief Isom, we're out of time. With just 20 seconds to go, is there the possibility we'll remove interim from your title and you'll be the public safety director for the city of St. Louis?
Well, I gave the mayor 2 years. So right now I'm sticking to that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us on Next Up. We sure appreciate your time, and thanks for sharing the information which you did.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dan Isom, the interim public safety director for 2 years with the city of St. Louis. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week at this time.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.